Welcome everybody to this webinar. This is the third and final episode in a series relating to road safety targets, target setting and safety performance indicators. So hopefully you'll have seen the first webinar that was hosted by my colleague Dan Capsule that looked at international best practice in target setting. The webinar last week, which was run by Nathan Harpham, that looked at casualty target setting, something that many of us are very familiar with. And then we're ending up here looking at safety performance indicators. Okay, so yeah, I'm Richard Owen. I'm the CEO of Agilicis. I'm the host of this webinar. This webinar, as I said, is part of a series run on behalf of Road Safety GB, forms a part of the Joining the Dots series. So many of you, I hope, will be joining this at the Joining the Dots conference that happens in just under a month's time in Birmingham. I'm sure we can put some details in on the chat if you haven't registered for that. It is going to be a live only event. In the past we've done it as a hybrid conference, but no, it's live only, so you've got to be there to make sure that you can make the most of it. So yeah, if you haven't registered, I think there's still a few tickets available, but as I said, hopefully many of you have already registered if you're in the UK. Obviously, we might have lots of international guests as well. Really happy to welcome you all. In terms of the presenters here, I am the only native of these isles, so I will do some introductions in a moment. We have Dr. Wouter van der Berger from Tilcon Research and Consulting, a Belgian native. He will be delivering a presentation looking at an overview of safety performance indicators, what they can be used for, and some practical examples of how they're being collected at the moment in various European countries. Victoria Piter from National Highways will then be talking about safety performance indicators relating to infrastructure, so highways related indicators, particularly focusing on how you can use IRAP information as a safety performance indicator. And then finally, Uta Meersman from VS Institute will be talking about the ESRA surveys, which have been going for a good number of years now. We're on to the third version of ESRA now. I won't steal any of her thunder, but talking about how we can use, that self-reported road user data to try and track trends over time and compare self-reported levels of road user behavior between countries, but then potentially within countries as well. So yeah, so we've got around 45 minutes of presentations. You'll be hearing from all of the presenters in turn, of course. Then we're going to have 15 minutes of QA. So as you'll notice, hopefully in Teams at the top, there's a Q&A section. If you put your questions in there, that would be great. So anything that you particularly want an answer on, something that you'd like the presenter to reflect on, absolutely put those in there. Makes my life really easy as a host. Of course, there's also the chat function as well. Notice that on many webinars, people like to have a bit of a debate in the chat. Happy for you guys to do that as well. But yeah, if there are specific questions that you want answering, I'm going to be looking at that when we get to the last 15 minutes of this. Of course, the slides will be available after the event. It'll go on our YouTube channel as well. So yeah, a great opportunity for you, all colleagues, to relive different elements of this. And I'm sure all of the presenters would be interested in answering any comments you may have after the webinar as well, if we don't manage to get through them all. A little bit for me, first of all, just to explain the history, a little bit of safety performance indicators. As this, is being delivered as part of the Road Safety GB Champions Network that is funded by Department for Transport, we have been taking a keen interest in safety performance indicators for a number of years now. We had a series of events. We had 2 different roundtables. Some of you may have been taking part in those roundtable events, working with road authorities, police, the health profession, thinking about what kind of safety performance indicators people might be using or might be thinking of using. And from that, we produced a report. There's a link to it on there. It's also available on the Road Safety Network and the Agilicis website if you search for it. And that looked around some of the existing evidence for safety performance indicators. But as you'd expect, things have moved on quite a lot over the last 3 years. And what we're looking at today are some further examples of, practical implementation of safety performance indicators. And I'm really looking forward to a debate amongst all of you about whether you're using these, whether you're interested in using these, and particularly how you see it informing any part of your road safety strategy. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Wouter, who is going to deliver a presentation on why we should be using road safety performance indicators. If you'd like to take control now, Wouter, and then you can run through the slides yourself. Oh, one thing I should mention, Wouter is joining us from Addis Ababa. So, hopefully there won't be any internet connection issues or any power issues. It's been going pretty well so far, but they may be famous last words. So over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Actually, it's almost evening here in Addis Ababa, and I apologize if my electricity falls down, and then Richard will intervene for a few minutes. I just want to check that you see now my title slides. Is that okay?
Yes, yeah. That's right.
Yeah, okay. So basically, the content of my presentation is actually there are 3 elements. First of all, why should we use road safety performance indicators at all, and what are they? And then I will actually give an example of what actually is covered by the European Trendline program. And then very specifically, one example about how actually the speed road safety performance indicators within Trendline have been defined and are being used. I'm trying to get control. Yeah, so maybe very short, but this is more for the reference. Who am I actually? I used to be research director at VIAS, but now I'm an independent consultant. I was together with Uta, actually father and mother of the ESDA project. I was project manager of Baseline and of Westbelt, and currently I'm project manager of Trendline. These are all projects which have to do with road safety performance indicators. I'm also happy to work with Richard on a project in Asia and SPIs, and since very recently I'm also working on road safety performance indicators in the context of Africa, and there are a number of publications which I have written about this, but you can find more on the slide if you look at it. So, so what are road safety performance indicators at all? First of all, let's think about an indicator as a value which you can actually define on certain aspects of process. And in a typical process or activity, you can have 3 fundamental concepts. And the first concept is the inputs. And in road safety, this means that you will implement appropriate measures and interventions, like for instance, setting speed limits or building roads or this is input. And you can actually have indicators on inputs. And especially in developing countries, you will actually say, has this country signed this UN directive, for instance? And that's an indicator on inputs. Or does a country have set speed limits on all its roads? That's an input factor. So that's where you could actually set indicators. The second one is the process, actually, what's actually happening. And for instance, if you're talking about the contributing factors, like, for instance, driving under the influence of alcohol, to what extent are people actually driving under the influence, or are they speeding, or actually using their mobile phone? So that's the process. And you can have actually indicators on that. What is the percentage of people actually speeding on certain types of roads? And last but not least, and that's where we actually are most used to have indicators on the output, and then we will typically think in road safety on fatalities, but it could also be serious injuries, even the economic value. Some people call this outcome. And also there you can have actually indicators in road safety. Now, there are some people who call indicators for all these different areas, they call them road safety performance indicators. There are some people who call road safety performance indicators typically the ones on fatalities, on outputs. But in general, the term road safety performance indicators is used for the processes, for the contributing factors. And that's also the way I will use it. But just to know that sometimes in certain publications, you will see either a more narrow view or a broader view on what actually road safety indicators or performance indicators are. Now, why would you actually use them? why would you use road safety performance indicators? And the main reason is that the key output indicators for road safety, they are based on the number of fatalities and injuries. But when you see actually that the numbers are decreasing or increasing or modifying, you don't actually know why. So in itself, they are not really explicatory enough. And so therefore, if you, on the other hand, you have also, in addition, indicators on the contributory factor, you can understand better the phenomena which are happening. In general, when we talk about road safety performance indicators, we're thinking of nationals, of regions, but you actually could also be on a city or even on certain streets. But today I'm more talking of the concept of indicators which you try to define for a large geographical area. And if you see, for instance, that the number of serious injuries of motorcyclists is increasing, you may have all kinds of hypotheses, but if at the same time you see that the helmet use has decreased, or for instance, the traffic has increased, you at least you have a plausible explanation explaining why this is happening, and therefore you can also then take the measures. So that's actually what's saying here. So you get more information about contributing factors, but also you can use them for something else. Let's go back to speeding. If you say we have too many deaths and injuries caused by speeding, we'll take more enforcement measures, more speed cameras. And then we'll first not just see whether the number of fatalities has decreased, but also that actually the number of speeders has decreased. So you can use them both to understand better the cause of accidents, but also to understand to what extent measures you have taken actually have been effective. So these are the two main reasons. These are important at national level for policies, but actually could also apply at regional and even at city level, although the logic for such indicators might be a little bit different. So what can you actually do with road safety performance indicators? You can actually do, in my view, 5 things. First of all, you can set targets. So if you can set realistic targets, you can, I'm going back to them, you can monitor progress, you can identify measures, you can assess effectiveness, and you can discover trends. So to some extent, it's an extension of what I said on the previous slide. So set targets, you can say, for instance, we want to increase the percent of motorcycle helmet wearing to 98%, or we want actually that all people are wearing a seatbelt. I just say the project in the Balkans and in countries like Kosovo, of the people in the rear, only 4% are having actually seatbelts. So you could set a realistic, very ambitious target of 30%, but of course in Britain, this would be much higher targets. Or it could even be that the target is 100%, because you say that's the only thing we can set. But you can do it. And the logic of doing it, and I'm happy there was a first webinar by Dan, where he explained also the different logics you can apply. But it's important to do so, because once you have target, you can see whether they are achieved or not, and then you come to actually to the progress. To be honest, it's actually not necessary to have targets to monitor progress, but it's better because if you just say we are moving from 92% to 95%, is that great? Is this fantastic? It depends on the target. If your target was 95%, you could say yes, basically we're almost there. If your target is 99%, then you can say basically our measures were not effective enough because we're still far away from our targets. But of course, target is politically sensitive because everyone likes targets, but then of course, who's accountable when the targets are not achieved? Also, although that's not limited to road safety performance indicators, you can actually identify more easily which measures actually could actually contribute to better performance. If you really see that there is a speeding issue in towns rather than rural areas, then you could see actually that that's where you have to take the measures, increase performance, put speed cameras, etc. I told already you can assess the effectiveness, and something which you also can do with fatality figures by breaking down the values of indicators to certain regions, to certain groups, to certain age groups, etc. You can actually see, based on the difference, where are the trends. For instance, and I think Uta can confirm that for Belgium, by actually looking at driving under the influence, there was a time that people thought it was only actually in the weekends. But in Belgium, they have seen over the last 10, 15 years, it's also becoming a weeknight problem. And that's because you see in the end we are improving in the weekends, but we are not improving over the weekdays. And overall, so there's actually stability. which would be hidden if you would not have done the breakdown. So that's why actually how you can actually use road safety performance indicators within a policy context. Now, I think for most road safety SPIs, there are 4 dimensions. And this is important because sometimes people say the SPI is the value is 97%. Now, that's not enough. If you say for seatbelt, it's 97%. That doesn't say, basically you have to typically identify 4 dimensions. The first one is the topics. Are we talking about seatbelt wearing, about speeding, about distraction by mobile phone, or about distraction to court? Second one, what is the geographical area, the jurisdiction we are talking about? Are we talking about the UK, about England, about Birmingham, about your neighborhoods? And it can be very different. The third dimension is the road type. Do we have an indicator applying to all road types together, or are we looking at a specific road type or road category, like certain types of rural roads or roads with a certain speed limit or motorways? And the fourth dimension is basically the road user category. Again, when you say 85% of the people are wearing a seatbelt, are you talking about car drivers only? Do you also include vans? Do you also include truck drivers or drivers of buses? So it's important that you specify the road categories involved. Only then actually it really makes sense to compare KPIs. And here actually I give an example. So you could say we are looking at the speeds in Wales at rural roads by motorcyclists. And so you have to define those 4 dimensions all the time. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to make comparisons. And actually, the ability to make comparisons is one of the key advantages of SPIs. Now, for methods for data collection, it is interesting to say that, first of all, in general, the more you have to cover a very big area or a country, the more the methods are traditional, the more you go to the local area or limited number of measurements, you can use more advanced methods. But basically, the 4 main areas or types of methodology you can use are roadside observations, being manual observation, but also by using cameras, by using radars, induction loops. So basically, there is objective measurement at the roadside, and there the big challenge is, of course, the sampling logic, so that actually your observations are representative in one way or another. A growing method is self-reported data, and one of the stars in Europe about self-reported data is actually one of the next speakers. So I won't develop that very much. It can be done on online service. There are different methods for that, but also through interviews. And actually, in developing countries, it might be cheaper to do interviews than do online service. But we do know that despite the drawbacks, that actually there are many advantages, and often actually they're sufficiently reliable if you do it in the right way. You can sometimes have databases like the crash record of police, which can help sometimes. Hospital data, but there are not that many countries which exploit it in a systematic way. And also administered database, for instance, on post-crash or sometimes, but we have to be very careful, other types of police records. And the reason you have to be careful with that is that in general, these are not based on representative sampling. The police tends to target certain areas and certain types of people and certain types of vehicles in certain contexts, and therefore you cannot use it to come or not easily to come to a representative sample. And then there are some other sources which can be used, like in-vehicle sensors becoming popular based on GPS location, also actually cameras, wearables, and also, of course, police checks. You could say that's a roadside observation, but a special one, and other technologies. I know Agilis, for instance, they have used satellite observation for speed data, which was very challenging, but it can be done. I would say that in Europe for the moment, if you look at most, that basically the most used is still roadside observations for many indicators, using either personal observations or using cameras or radars. I don't know what's happening, but I'm just checking out. Didn't go to follow. No, that's okay. So that brings me to the Trendline projects. The Trendline project runs from 2022, will finish this year, and its ambition is to promote the use of road safety KPIs within the European Union. You see all of a sudden the word KPI and not SPI. That's how the European Commission defined them, but it's more an exception. So in scientific publications, the term KPI is not so common, and typically people will use SPIs. And the argument of the Commission was that if you do it and you have KPI data on a regular basis, it will actually increase the evidence base for road safety policies. And we see this actually happening also, especially countries which do it for the first time. But the added value of Trendline and its predecessor Baseline was that by using more or less the same methodology across countries, you can actually then not just compare values within a country, but also across countries. And you can learn from that, but also it can be used for political pressures in certain countries. The fact that the performance is low actually can be used by NGOs and other people to say to politicians, look how bad we are doing. And I can certainly tell you that even if people like in the Western Balkans, they knew it was very bad, didn't know it was that bad. And policymakers are no more convinced that they have to take stricter measures on seatbelt wearing and also on distraction. And just financially, basically, the project gets funded 50% by the European Commission, or almost 50%, because the VAT is excluded, which is fully funded. Trendline, the successor of Baseline, run by VIAS in the past. And Trendline is now run from SWOF in the Netherlands. So Trendline, in a nutshell, we have actually 25 EU countries out of the 27, which I think is a big success. But you should know that they do not all use all the indicators. We have, in addition, 4 observers, the 2 missing EU countries, Estonia and Malta, but also Norway and Switzerland. We have 8 initial KPIs, I'll come back to that, but also 10 experimental KPIs, and also news actually a part to have policy integration, or actually how can we stimulate national authorities to use road safety performance indicators in their policy plans. So these are basically the existing initial KPIs that are very traditional, no infrastructure a bit problematic. Vehicle safety and postcards are not that much used, and some people even have questions about the relevance of vehicle safety. But the other ones, speeding, safety belt, helmets, drink driving, distraction, are the traditional pillars of bad behavior. And it's of course quite obvious that the KPIs on these areas are important. And so there's already a traditional baseline of collecting data. We are actually in the phase of analyzes the data, and in a few months actually we will present also the results of our Trendline and be able to compare to what extent there has been progress compared to Baseline a few years ago. And here, just for reference, is actually how it has been defined by the European Commission. It's interesting to know that the European Commission chose to form it in a positive way. So how many people respecting the speed limit rather than not respecting the speed limit. Personally, I don't think that's the right way, but that's actually how it's done. So it's formed in a positive way. And I think it's better to do the other way around, but that's another discussion. Okay. And this gives an example with a strange graph you see on the horizontal line are the countries, and every color represents an indicator or a subcategory of an indicator. And you see many countries like Austria, Greece, Lithuania, Portugal. They have actually almost all the indicators, but there are a few ones like Cyprus and Italy and Luxembourg with only like 4 or 5. And the minimum requirement was actually 3. So that's the current situation, and we expect in the future it will also be similar. It has also to be said that certain countries, in addition to the standard KPIs, have also their own additional KPIs. So it's not that this limits what they are doing. But the big advantage now is that actually in principle it will be possible to compare. The indicators the SPI most use are speeding and distraction. But in addition, and that's very interesting, there was also demand from member states to look beyond the traditional areas. And there has been a whole process of selecting, defining, and now testing methodology for new experimental KPIs. Sometimes an extension of the scope of existing one, but sometimes they are completely new. They've been selected. We had key experts group looking at it. And then we basically have been testing or are testing the methodologies developed, some of which are relatively similar to what has happened already in Baseline or in SafetyNet and Dakota, but some of them are quite new. And the end product in this case will not be values, but actually will be methodological guidelines, which could in principle be used anywhere in the world. So that's basically the scope of these experimental KPIs. And of course, you will be interested to know which ones they are. So driving under the influence of drugs, the part of 30 km per hour roads in urban zones, which would be 20 miles per hour in the UK, red light negations by road users, compliance with traffic rules at intersections, and it's like giving yields, for instance, helmet wearing by, say, e-steps riders, self-reported risky behavior, and actually Uta is coordinating that, attitudes towards risky behavior as a potential proxy for the real observations, use of lights by cyclists in the dark, enforcement of traffic regulations, and speed variation. So not so much speeding, but actually the amount of speed variation on roads. So this is actually going on. All of these have been defined. Actually, these are not the final names. These are like working titles. And for most, the tests of the methodologies have been completed and they will now be written up. And for certain countries, for certain of them, we actually will have values. And there will be also discussion about the relevance of those indicators for the future. It looks like that most of these will be accepted by the Commission, actually for the future to become part of the next phase of Trendline, but that has not been decided yet. And the new call for the success of Trendline has not been out, but there are strong arguments to keep in one way or another most of those also in the future. So the actual standard European set will become much larger than it currently is. And then as a kind of example of how it actually works. So first of all, you start with an ID. We need a KPI on speed. In this case, actually, there was a definition given by the Commission, the percentage of vehicles traveling within the speed limit. So it actually means you have to do it for every type of road with a different speed limit. So there are already a breakdown. But in addition, already within Trendline and Baseline, the group decided that when you do this, you also have to use the same data collection to use the V85, the speed below which 85% of drivers are driving. That's actually a very old indicator, and also the average speed. So that's basically the definition. And then there are, and this actually differs for every KPI, like minimum requirements in terms of definition, the type of location, the road times which have to be covered, the vehicle types which are at minimum required. And here you see, for instance, passenger car are a minimum, but member states can also take trucks or buses or even motorcyclists to add on, but that's not a minimum requirement. But for instance, what is a minimum requirement? That you have daylight hours and you do it in spring or autumn and not in winter or summer. So these are all kinds of requirements to increase the comparability, not just within the country over time, but also between countries. What is maybe strange that the minimum sample size for speed is relatively low. You have to have like 2,000 observations and 500 per road type. In general, it's much higher, like 10,000 of observations, but this is to be consistent with some of the other road types observation, where actually getting 2,000 observations can be even a challenge. So that's basically how it looks like, and is actually the base for the measurements in the member states. And here you see, for instance, all the EU member states which are calculating the KPI speed in general for several types of road type, but there are some countries which don't have motorways, and of course then there is no KPI on the motorways, or other who have actually split up the rural roads in different types of rural roads. And then what is interesting, one of the experimental speed indicators actually is about speed variation. And so the first thing the group did was actually to come to definitions. What are we talking about? And actually, this actually the definition they proposed: the person of vehicles traveling 10 km per hour or 20 km per hour or 30 km per hour faster than the speed limit. And then that's the first definition. And the second one is the difference between the lowest and highest 10% of speeds per road type or area type or speed limit or vehicle type. And one of the arguments for these definitions and these choices, because otherwise possible that you can actually in principle use the same database which you actually use for also calculating the speed limits. And they are now actually finalizing the work and also doing some examples, and it's almost sure that this will become integrated in the next phase of Trendline. And maybe something interesting, this exists for all the different indicators that in our methodological guidelines, we also give guidance on what to use, and what is quite important for for speed are measuring devices, and we say, okay, you can use any measuring device you have. However, it should meet the following requirements, and that goes even up to like that can be calibrated, that it cannot, that it is like can be protected from vandalism, that has a huge storage, etc. So we say we would recommend that you meet all these requirements before you actually do speed measurements. Otherwise, the results might not be available. And calibration is something which is often disregarded and therefore makes some of the data useless. And I think, yeah, and I see. So I give an example of some of the graphics. This case actually comes from baseline, where we have the result where you see basically the speed compliance. What you see there, first of all, that there's a big difference between the countries, but also that there's a big difference between types of roads. I mean, I'm not sure it's readable. You see actually that motorways and rural roads, it's better than urban roads. However, we have to say that the concept of free flow is difficult to guarantee in urban roads and might actually not be even so relevant. But you see that still in the European Union, there are quite some difference between countries, but also within countries in terms of the type of roads. Key results from baseline can be found at these addresses, so they're all available, and there will be something similar that will be produced for trendline in, let's say, by August, September of this year. We hope to have the results for trendline published. And I thank you for your attention. I will be happy to answer questions later.
Thank you for that, Wouter. That was absolutely fantastic. A whistle-stop tour of why to do safety performance indicators and how to do them properly. Those figures at the end showing the comparisons across the EU countries. You know, that's the end result. That's absolutely what we need. I've got a whole bunch of questions lined up, and I'm sure we're going to have some coming through the Q&A as well. But we are going to move on.
Okay, this works. Can you see my slides? Yeah.
Yes.
And you hear me loud and clearly. Good.
Of course.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, thanks for the invitation. Yeah, I will talk. Yeah, as has already been announced, I will talk about our ESRA initiative and our approach to monitor road safety with based on self-reports. So I will first explain the project itself to you, and then I selected some examples of results focusing on Europe and the UK. So what is ESRA? ESRA stands for E-Survey on Road User Attitudes, and it's an online panel survey which we conducted already in 68 countries across the world. So it's really a global project, and it's coordinated by FIA's Institute together with 10 steering group members, and it's funded by the partners themselves, by their own sources or external sponsors. So our aim of ESRA is to collect and analyze comparable data on road safety performance and traffic safety culture. And through that, we want to provide scientific support for road safety policy making at national and international level. And I added here on this slide 2 examples of monitoring organizations which are monitoring road safety and which you know. And they are using ESRA data, and that's, for example, the WHO. They are using ESRA data in the last global status report on road safety, and also within the ERSO project as a European Road Safety Observatory. In most of the thematic reports, they also use ESRA data. We started together, as Wouter already said, together with Wouter in 2015 and 17 European countries. And that was for us in Belgium the moment when we shifted from face-to-face interviews to online surveys. And we very, very rapidly grew to a global project. And we are now in the 3rd edition. And we are just about to close this SR3, and in SR3 we collected data in 2023 in 39 countries, and you can see here this is the coverage of the countries which we have in our last edition. So as I said, ESRA is an online panel survey, and you can think of it actually as one survey to which we just add different national language versions. which increases the comparability of the data, and also because we are at FIAS are conducting the survey centrally and also do the data processing centrally, there's high comparability across the countries. So in ESRA3, as I said, we had 39 countries and a total sample size of more than 37,000 road users. We aim at 1,000 road users per country within the age group 18 and 74 years. Yeah, and it takes about 20 minutes to fill in the questionnaire, and we have more than 400 variables for which we all calculate regional and national means, and which are displayed also in our ESRA dashboard on our website. So here you can see the content of our survey, of our questionnaire. We target 5 different road user groups and 5 key road safety topics. And for each of these topics, we have different themes which range from self-reported behavior, the acceptability of this behavior, but also related attitude, support for policy measures, or enforcement perception. And here you can see the common output which we are producing in ESRA together with the steering group. And all this output is freely accessible on the ESRA website. So you have the dashboard, and I will show you some results from that in the next slides. And for the UK, we also have a country fact sheet where you can compare the UK results to our European mean. We have 13 thematic reports. Those here are the last 4 ones which we just published. And there will be a conference coming up in June. So as I already said, I selected a few results for you as examples of what ESRA can provide for our national partners. And I have focused on Europe and UK, and especially on the topic driving under influence and mobile phone use. So this is directly from our dashboard. Oh, it's a bit unsharp. Is that also for you unsharp, this slide?
I can see it because I've got quite a big screen. But yeah, I know definitely on the slides, people will be able to see it later.
Yeah, okay. So we should improve that. Yeah. So this is directly extracted from the dashboard. And you see, I selected self-declared behavior and car drivers. And you see here the results of car drivers who reported that they have been driving a car when they might have been over the legal limit for drink driving. And this ranges in Europe from Luxembourg, and I cannot see the number right now on this slide. I will look further. Yeah, it's from 24% up to down to Poland with 4%, and the UK here has 8% is a little bit lower than the European average. And I think something which probably immediately pops up in your head is that this variable is related to the alcohol limit, which is higher in the UK than for many other European countries. But in ESRA, we also have another variable where we asked if the car driver has driven after drinking alcohol, which is also including small amounts of alcohol. And also there, the UK performs better than the European average. You can check that in the dashboard. So this now is about enforcement of drink driving, and the slide shows the percentage of car drivers who reported an alcohol check from the police in at least one in the last year. And there are huge differences within Europe, and they range from 42% in Serbia to 6% in the UK. Big differences here. And now one slide on support for policy measures and related to drink driving. And this slide shows the percentage of road users who support a zero tolerance for all drivers of motorized vehicles. And the support is really high in almost all the countries which we have in the ESRA survey. And within Europe, this ranges go to the other slide. This ranges from, wait just a second, I cannot read it, from 75% in Serbia to 43% in Luxembourg. And remember, Luxembourg had the highest prevalence for drink driving in this comparison and the lowest support. And in the UK, the support is also really high. It's 73% of our respondents supported a zero tolerance for alcohol in the UK. Now we switch to another topic, distraction, or more as this slide specifically shows the percentage of drivers who declared that they talked on a handheld mobile phone while driving at least once in the last month. And this ranges from 40%, 41% in Bosnia and Herzegovina to 14% in the, wait, how much is this? 14% in the Netherlands. And also here, the United Kingdom has really low prevalence. They are the second best student in the class in this comparison. And this good performance of the UK is confirmed in another question which we have related to mobile phone use. Here you see the percentage of car drivers who declared that they read a message or checked social media while driving at least once in the last month. And also here, UK has the lowest numbers. What we did in ESRA and also in Trendline, we compared, we had a look at the correlations between self-declared behavior and observed behavior. So we compared ESRA 3 results with baseline results. And because we wanted to understand the relation better between these two different concepts, you need to be well aware that these are really different concepts, because baseline, they are measuring a point prevalence, and ESRA a period prevalence, which leads to different values. But if you look at, besides this, and also besides the fact that we can only compare few countries because there's no more information available from baseline at that moment, yeah, we see a really high correlation between self-reported and observed behavior for these topics, indicating that countries with a high prevalence of observed behavior also have a high prevalence in self-declared behavior. This is true for this topic. This is not true for all topics, but we are currently further investigating this. That's part of the experimental indicator, which Walter already explained before. And we are also very much looking forward to update these numbers with the trend line information, and so that we can include more countries in this comparison. So to summarize for ESRA, I think the best way to stay tuned on ESRA is to keep an eye on our website, or even better to sign up for the newsletter. Here we are the contact sheet. Very soon we will publish 2 more thematic reports and also our final report. And there are 2 events in June in Brussels on ESRA. The first one is an internal event for ESRA members, but the second one is an open event in Brussels, and we coordinated with ETSC. It's in the same week as the ETSC PIN conference and PIN panel, so that participants are able to visit both events. And Richard asked me to say a few words about the upcoming edition as well. So we plan to conduct a fieldwork of our next edition, ESRA 4, in spring 2026, which means that all partners, including the UK, have to sign up before the summer this year. And so that, because we need this preparation time with all the translations to be able to do the field work in 2016. And then the aim is to have the results ready for the partners at the end of the year, 2026, and to disseminate the results then in the 2 following years. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm looking forward to your questions and later discussion. Thank you.
Thank you again, Uta. Okay, I'm going to go back to the slides for Victoria, and hopefully Victoria can do these in about 8 or 9 minutes, so we can have a bit of a chat and a Q&A. If the Q&A does go beyond 3 o'clock, I'm happy to facilitate some of that. Hopefully some or most of the presenters will be able to stay on afterwards. I appreciate many of you may have other things to do. So, Victoria, over to you.
I'll do my absolute best. So I've taken control. I'm skipping to, I'll have to go back to my presentation, don't I? Yeah, gotcha. Done. Can you see that slide?
Yep, that's fine.
Brilliant. So I'm going to talk about our IRAP performance indicator. National Highways has several performance indicators, but we only have one lead safety performance indicator, and that is the IRAP metric. It's the current definition of it is outlined in our operational metrics manual, which you can find online if you're particularly interested in the exact definition. So we went through a process of revising this indicator last year. So my presentation is going to focus on that process and the key elements of what really, what we have to do to make this indicator have an impact, and why it's useful to us. So just for anyone who's not aware of what IRAP is, it is a rating system essentially. So IRAP stands for International Roads Assessment Program, and essentially what we do is take a video survey of our network. We've just commissioned the 2025 survey, so we have vehicles out on the network at the moment, trundling along, taking a video of the whole network. And then what happens with that is we have some poor, very bored, I'm sure, people who code that information, and they look for 52 attributes that are related to road safety. And this is a standardized process that's managed. There's a whole definition and manual and all the rest of it that IRAP specifies as to how this is to be done. So they code the data looking for those 52 attributes. They combine that information with vehicle speed and flow data, and they then rank each 100-meter segment of road according to how the IRAP model combines that information to rate it in terms of the inbuilt safety of that section of road. So 1 star being the worst, 5 star being the best. I'm going to ignore the stuff about safer road investment plans on this because it's not quite relevant to this particular presentation and the FSI estimates. In terms of a performance indicator, we use the IRAP metric partly to track performance, but also to motivate improvements and to identify routes for intervention that can help us to make improvements to that indicator. So why did we need a new performance indicator? We had the 3-star or above. So essentially the existing metric was the percentage of traffic using traveling on roads that are rated 3 stars or greater. And I haven't moved my slide along. There we go. There's some benefits to that. I don't know whether you consider it a benefit or not, but it is a standard-ish metric. It's a global sustainable development goal. So there is that comparability across other networks, road networks that calculate that do an IRAP survey. It's easy to communicate, or relatively easy to communicate. It emphasizes the importance of a minimum safety standard, and there is a quantifiable link between improving star ratings and KSI reduction, KSI standing for killed and seriously injured. But there are some limitations, some improvements which can substantially reduce risk are not recognised or motivated by the previous metrics. So there was no drive to improve safety on 1- and 2-star roads unless the improvements resulted in 3-star rating. And there was no real drive to further improve safety on 3-star on roads that were already rated 3-star or above. And similarly, there was a disproportionate recognition for moving from what might have been a high 2-star to a low 3-star, when the actual risk reduction from that might not be that great. So we looked for a new metric. We had a list of 6 potential metrics. We narrowed it down to 2 initially. Option A, do nothing, stay with the percentage of travel on 3-star or greater roads. We've just gone through what the pros and cons of that are. Option 3 was to move to an average flow weighted decimal star rating, which recognises all reductions in risk proportionally, regardless of whether the 3-star boundary is crossed. Measures improvements within star rating bounds, motivates continued improvement of roads which have already crossed that 3-star boundary, and as with the other one, provides a quantifiable link between star rating and KSI reduction. But if you change to that, then there's no minimum safety standard. So what we said was, okay, we want that, but we also want the other one. So we proposed to combine them, and that's what ended up being approved. We get the benefits of both without the disbenefits. That took quite a long time. Simple, just whizzed through that in a half a minute. But the process of getting that approved was, bureaucracy. But whatever. We've done it pretty much. We just have to get final sign off by DFT, and we're all good. What is a decimal star rating? I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that because I don't have a lot of time left. Essentially, star ratings are based on an underlying star rating score. Those star rating scores just get banded up. And when we talk about a decimal star rating, all we're doing is splitting those bands. So for example, if you took a 5-star rating, split that up into 10 sub-bands, if you want to call it that, and that's your decimal star ratings, 5.1 to 5.9, I guess, or 5.0 to 5.9. And what it does is it means that when your practitioners are designing a new scheme and they're using a tool like the route review tool, they can calculate the current decimal star rating and what the new star rating should be based on what they've put into that tool, compare the two and go, oh, okay, it looks like I'm getting a decent improvement in that inbuilt safety of this. And that's something that we encourage them to do, to include in their business cases. And I'll go into that a little bit more in a minute. This is what it looks like when we retrospectively apply that option C to our 2020 survey data. Can't apply it to 2025 because the vehicles are literally on the network doing the survey at the moment. And we only do the survey once every 5 years. If you look at these charts, and I apologise, they are a little bit small. The one on the left looks at the results by region. The one on the right looks at the results by road type. And the road type categories there are motorway, dual carriageway A road, and single carriageway A road. And what's immediately apparent there, remembering that the bars are the percentage of travel on 3-star roads or above, and the dots are the average decimal star rating, is that the percentage of travel on 3-star or above rated roads is much higher on the motorway network, and the average decimal star rating is much higher on the motorway network, and that is pretty unsurprising, frankly. But it does help us to really focus on where the opportunities are to really improve the built environment and up that inbuilt safety, which is more on the single carriageway A roads, which is where the majority of our 1- and 2-star road network are. Excuse me. So I hope I've explained that slide well enough. But the really important part of all of this is really, well, how does having that indicator improve safety? And as an organisation, we've had to work really hard to embed this indicator really well. We have to have it included in our strategy, in our business planning, in our business processes, and we have to uplift the capability of our engineers to be able to calculate those star ratings as part of developing schemes, so that when they put business cases together, it helps them to have their routes that they are looking to treat prioritized for funding. And that motivates them because they like having their routes prioritized for funding. So that's what the name of the game is. We want to motivate and track improvements in those lower star roads, even if they don't cross that 3-star boundary. We use this to inform the design of route treatments in combination with some new functionality in that tool that we've got, which now includes speed management measures and an ability to output information that can be put directly into business cases. And we use it to evaluate some outcomes from our investments. And all of this together helps us to increase the star ratings on our roads, which reduces KSIs. I'm going to skip that because we don't have time. And that's it, really. I think the key point, though, is that you've got the performance indicator, but it's only impactful if you embed the capability within the organisation to do something about the results. And that's why we've got those tools, training, processes, embedment in strategy, etc. And one really important thing, which I didn't mention, is guidance as well. We've embedded it in the Guide to Road Safety Route Treatment as well, and that helps. Sorry, Richard, I didn't quite do that in your specified time limits, but there we go.
Sorry. Hey, that was absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much, everybody, for getting everything so much in there. A jam-packed event. I won't use my presenter's privilege to ask any questions because we don't have any time on that one, I'm afraid. There are a couple that were put in there specifically. So Christine, hi Christine, nice to see you. Hopefully you're still on. She asked a question for Wouter around recommending some of the latest speed measuring tools that would meet the requirements highlighted. Do you know of any specific recommendations about tools?
I gave already an answer in the chat as well. So, I mean, of course, this varies by country, but I would say in general, the equipment used by police force in at least 1 or 2 countries would normally already meet those requirements because they're used for enforcement, for penalties. So, but of course, it's the way how you use them in terms of calibration and location, etc. But so things are changing all the time. But you could say that if at least in 1 or 2 countries the police is actually using them for their speed observations, you can be quite sure that would suffice. So I hesitate to give certain brands or so, because even within the same brands they have different qualities. And that's already a tough criteria because the police is often conservative because they don't want to be accused that their measurement is not okay. I think the challenge is more that, I mean, do you calibrate the cameras in the right way? Do you know how to interpret the data? Do you put them actually at the right locations? Than actually the measurement itself, at least for now.
Thank you. Axel had a question for Uta, and this is one that I'm particularly interested in. So regarding the ESRA dashboard, can the UK be split up into the individual regions? And then my follow-up question on that one is, if we're thinking about ESRA 4, what kind of commitment could the UK and many of our sub-regions put into that survey to make sure that we can do this at a much more granular level within the country?
Yeah, excellent question. Thank you. Yeah, at the moment, the dashboard cannot be split up in the sub-regions within the UK. So the dashboard is focusing really on national results and bigger regions like Europe, America, and Asia. But if it would be the interest of the UK to split up the ESRA results per region, I would strongly recommend to increase the sample size. That's what we do in Belgium as well. We are using a higher sample size because we want to have results split up for our main 3 regions, and this means as a commitment. It's possible within ESRA to increase the sample size, but this has to be paid by the national partner. We have to find financing for that.
So the easy answer is the Department for Transport in the UK just needs to pay more money. That's a really good answer that I like. I did notice there was somebody from the Department for Transport on the call earlier, so hopefully he will have noted that. No, I think that's really good, and I know that because there's so many local authorities and regional highway authorities that attend these conferences. They'd love to see this kind of information at a local level, and I think piggybacking Ezra seems like a simple solution, but then it's not going to be my money. I did have a question for Victoria, actually. How well do you think it is, how easy do you think it is to communicate that kind of star rating system to members of the public? Is it easy? Is there any understanding of whether they engage with a star rating? Because if we had a star rating for motorways on there, which we do, including smart motorways, that's really high, but the public perception is that they're very dangerous, high risk roads, and if they're being put on to single carriageway roads, which we can see have got a decimal rating of 1.8, that's not good. That's a really big increase in risk. Is there an effort to try and explain this to members of the public?
It's not something we try to explain to members of the public. We publish the reports, but fundamentally it's not really something we expect people to want to engage with. I think someone like Susie is really, really good at explaining these things in a way that lay people will understand probably much better than I am able to. No, the short answer is we have discussed with our comms people. Their advice is they don't think it's something that that we should be trying to communicate widely, but we have that transparency of we publish the results, and yeah. But no, it's more about us sort of using that information and doing our best to increase the standards across the network in a more or less objective fashion, as opposed to being driven entirely by media and public perceptions, which when you get particularly vocal people on particular topics or in particular specific locations, you don't necessarily get the best outcomes.
Yeah. There's another one. This might be the last one for me, as we are over time. But Nicholas mentions in there around camera systems capturing phone use, and this links into a little bit, the analysis that Uta showed, comparing roadside survey results against self-reported data, which for the 2 that she showed had a really good correlation. I just wondered if any of the panel have thoughts of the possibility to use technology to replace or improve roadside surveys, and whether this is something that is being looked at in terms of a safety performance indicator. If anybody has any thoughts.
It's something
for distraction,
that
there are some countries in trend line using it, but cameras. Yeah. So it can be done. It's not necessarily cheaper for the moment, but over time it's more promising. Also for seatbelt distraction.
Yeah, I think one of the concerns would be if you were using something that's an enforcement technology, an obvious enforcement technology to measure a statistic, people may be aware of the enforcement technology and change their behavior. So it'd almost have to be covert, I suspect. Uta, do you have any thoughts on that? No, you don't. No, there we go. No, that's
but for instance, I mean, like for seatbelt, I mean, if they're roadside observers and they're with like a yellow shirt, it's very good because people will slow down because they think it's police, but they won't change their seatbelt. However, for distraction by mobile phone, is they would suspect that the guy might be police, they will take down their phone. So sometimes being seen is not a problem. Sometimes it is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And, I think another thing that I picked up from Uto as well, this, depending on the metric that you're measuring, the difference between point measurements versus periods, asking somebody, have they ever done it over the last X number of months, years, is a really important thing. So it's not necessarily the hard number that comes out that's important and comparing those two sources. It is absolutely about the indicators, the percentage of reported compliance, let's say, if you're reporting the indicator in that direction. And just the 3 slides showing UK's level of reported behaviour and support for drink driving was absolutely fascinating, showing that we don't do anywhere near the level of drink drive checks that other countries in Europe do. And I think that's the first time I've seen that evidence, and that's definitely something that's worth mentioning here. So look, thank you all for your time. Thank you to all of our presenters. We got there. That was absolutely fantastic. If there are any further questions that anybody has, definitely make sure that you get in touch. We'll be putting the recording up, making the slides available, and as I mentioned at the beginning, hopefully do get to see many of you at Joining the Dots. We will be running another 2 webinars later on in March. One of those is going to be looking at motorcycling, so yeah, they will be hitting your inbox over the next couple of weeks. So yes, thanks to everybody that's joined in. Thank you again to the presenters, and hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.